I think that Israel faces social media challenges that no other army and no other country in the world face. I think that there's no other military that has to really worry about how they're perceived in the international audience, because Israel is the only country that has to have the legitimacy to fight and the permission, I would say, from our allies in order to take action on the ground.
Hi folks, James here, and welcome to the Spyro Circle. This week I spoke to Rachel Lester, who served in the IDF spokesperson's unit in the days following October 7. It was a super interesting conversation because I heard from her all about how the wartime activities were taking place on the battleground, but also in digital spaces. She was the one that made a lot of those IDF videos in the early days of the war, outlining Hamas's intentions, highlighting the impact that the attack had on Israel and Israeli society. And she recently wrote a book called Digital Warrior, taking control of the narratives after October 7. So we spoke all about the media, we spoke about her book, we spoke about AI and some of the impact that all of that's had on truth-telling and narrative storytelling. So I really hope you enjoy. Rachel, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm super excited, and we're just meeting now for the first time, but I kind of feel like I know you already because I spent the last couple of weeks diving into your book that we're going to talk about today, Digital Warrior. I love these kinds of episodes. I love the ones where I can kind of dive in to someone's story or experience or history and have the opportunity to talk about it. So thank you for your time, first of all, before we get going.
Of course, it's such a pleasure to be here.
Of course, I just want to give a bit of overview for those who may be tuning in or watching for the first time who aren't so familiar with the context exactly. So you were serving in the IDF basically in the days of October 7, and the kind of how you outline it in the book is kind of the first year up until about the Iran war. But, let's just say for argument's sake for now, maybe roughly the first year of October 7, and you were on the digital side of things. So before we dive into it, please, why don't you just kind of give a brief overview as to what you were doing specifically in the IDF and what your role entailed?
I was in the IDF spokesperson's unit. When I was a soldier in my active service, I was editing videos showcasing Israel's narrative to the world and explaining what was going on with Israel, with our enemies. And that's what I did after October 7th too. I was called into reserves from October 8th, and I stayed for over 6 months and then came back a few weeks here and there up to the first year. And my goal was to create content for the IDF's international social media accounts, over 10 million followers across all platforms, and explain to the world a few things. Explain to the world what Israel was going through on like the home front level of having just endured the biggest massacre of people since the Holocaust. Explain to the world who our enemies are, what Hamas and Hezbollah mean when they say things and when they act against Israeli civilians, and also critically explain to the world about civilians in Gaza, because you can talk all you want about how Hamas has affected Israeli civilians, but what the international audience really cares about is Gazan civilians, and we have to show, in order to make our case, we have to show how they're being used as tools by Hamas in order to progress Hamas's goals, which is essentially getting the world to hate Israel.
No, it's amazing, and you give such a detailed kind of day by day, almost kind of like a diary entry, especially in those early days. You really do outline kind of what the country was feeling, how the IDF was reacting, and then subsequently what the world was how the world was reacting to the decisions that you were making or your team were making based on the actions, of course, by Hamas. I want to touch on something that you highlight in the book that I found really interesting, that I think in many ways sets the tone for the challenges ahead. It wasn't a simple kind of Middle Eastern, Western message. that you kind of had to tread. You outlined that there were basically three types of communication skills that the IDF had to convey in those early days. And correct me if I'm wrong in the specifics or language in this, but the IDF had to convey in Hebrew to the Israeli public, "We are strong. Don't worry. We'll protect you." Meanwhile, in Arabic and Farsi to the kind of enemy civilians or adversary states, the IDF had to say, "We are strong, and we are watching you, and we are coming for you." But also, your leaders are corrupting you, so they kind of had to do that line. And then you had a third branch of communication, which was to the international desks, English or Spanish or French. And in that message, you had to basically present, the IDF or Israel, we are at risk, we are under attack, almost kind of vulnerable, sympathetic side of things. That is difficult to do.
Yes.
Talk us through exactly the challenges there and how the IDF kind of managed those three different levels of communication.
Yeah, well, the thing about the IDF spokesperson's unit is that the three departments, the Hebrew department, the Farsi/Arabic department, and the international department, work pretty independently of each other. So it's not like there's a room where we're sitting down feeling like coming together saying, okay, how are we going to convey our message across three different platforms? The Hebrew department does its own thing, the Arabic and Farsi department does its own thing, and the international department does its own thing. And we just kind of wait. It sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. So in the instances where it does work, it's great because what we are trying to convey as the international audience is that we're under attack and we need to be fighting the war in order to survive. Because if you're projecting strength in the international audience, then okay, you're strong. You don't need to be attacking military targets and having collateral damage of civilians in Gaza or in Lebanon. But if you're under attack, then you have the right to self-defense. But the Hebrew side of things needs to kind of calm the Israeli people down and say, we're taking care of things, we're on it, especially in the hours after October 7th when the military was nowhere to be found. The messages have to be that we are taking care of business and you civilians of Israel have nothing to worry about. And as you said, and then the Arabic and Farsi department, it's really trying to strike fear into the Arabic and Persian or, Iranian enemies who have probably thought about maybe, launching more rockets at Israel or inciting violence within, the Judean Samaria or Gaza. And it's just really a tightrope to walk, basically, because a lot of the times our messages are contradictory and sometimes people in the world pick up on that and we get questions about it. But at the end of the day, we all have our individual messaging that we have to maintain, and we just kind of do the best we can to not step on each other's toes.
Yeah, well, it's kind of the best and worst time ever to be able to put out three different types of tailored messaging, because you're right, it's going to come across as contradictory, and it's never been so easy for Western audiences to get hold of messaging that's taking place in the Middle East or vice versa, and then for kind of critics or skeptics to piece that together, it may be a bit of a challenge to explain the tapestry that's kind of being built. When those three layers were going out, which voice did you find often came up on top, for better or for worse?
I think that the international messaging came up on top because we have the biggest following and we have international reporters watching our social media. And I think that for the most part, the Israeli messaging kind of stayed stuck within the Israeli bubble, and the Arabic messaging stayed within that bubble. But I think that from my perspective as somebody who was working in the international team, I think that our messaging came across the strongest.
Does every nation or army need to have that kind of division of messaging, or do you think that's something that is reserved for a country like Israel or an army like the IDF?
I think that Israel faces social media challenges that no other army and no other country in the world face. I think that we have the unique challenge of trying to reassure our civilians that we are safe and that the army is in control, while at the same time conveying to the world these are our enemies. This is what our enemies are doing right now. This is what our enemies just did, committed the largest attack on Israel in our history. And if we don't fight them, then they're going to do it again and again, as they've said. I think that there's no other military that has to really worry about how they're perceived in the international audience, because Israel is the only country that has to have the legitimacy to fight and the permission, I would say, from our allies in order to take action on the ground. The French army doesn't need to worry about what the UN is going to say about its actions. The German army doesn't need to worry about the US president calling and saying enough is enough and we're not going to support you anymore. It's simply an Israeli only problem that we have to navigate, and we have to navigate it very, very carefully.
I want to, and this kind of leads me into the next part of the book that I wanted to speak about, is that you kind of coined a term for the book, PODC, which is pictures of dead children, and that's what I'll say it the once, and then I'll refer to it as PODC hereafter, as you do in the book. So PODC, your thesis, or one of them, is that basically nothing beats emotional photos when it comes to claiming victory over the narrative of the war. And you write that the use of those photos is more used on one side than the other. And you even make a point of saying that Israelis and the IDF instinctively don't want to show photos that may cause trauma or harm to civilians, while you note that people in Gaza did want to do that, and we'll get into the technical aspects of that a bit later on. But based on what you've just said about Israel and the IDF having a bit of a standard that no other military kind of has to kind of adhere to, what do you think the consequences of those kinds of decisions are 2 years later? The one that an army that is constantly under scrutiny, making decisions not to present emotional footage and trying to rely on chasing the narrative. Like, what do you think the consequences of that was compounding? And you can outline each decision and why it was made, but all of these decisions have compounding effects. So what do you think happened there in those months?
So what happened was that a few weeks after October 7th, we got the directive from the head of the unit saying that we were no longer allowed to show unblurred footage and photos from October 7th and from the aftermath of the massacre. And I was very against that, because as much as I respect and empathize with the Israeli public who were severely emotionally distraught over seeing these images over and over, I very much empathize with that. But you can't fight a war against a terrorist organization who is constantly pumping out photos of dead children. As you mentioned, I called it PODC. You can't fight that battle without showing your own PODC, because otherwise, if you're not constantly reminding the world what was at stake, what happened, the costs that we had to pay then why are we even fighting? Like as in, why would the world be on our side if we're not showing the reasons that we have to fight and the consequences of what we would go through if we didn't fight, if we laid down our arms and just said, okay, Hamas, we're chill, we're not going to fight you. Then the photos and videos of October 7th, then we would have those again and again and again, because Hamas said in every interview, we're waiting for another October 7th. We're going to do another October 7th. And it doesn't really hit strong with an international audience to just hear the phrase, we're going to do another October 7th. No, they need to see what October 7th was. They need to be reminded of the butchered families and the dead children and the blood-soaked mattresses and bullet-ridden doors. And if, I think the consequences, to go back to your question, what were the consequences? I think we lost a lot of world sympathy after we stopped showing those images because people forgot what happened and they were only consumed with media from the Palestinian side.
Because there's a paradox, isn't there? Because it's kind of one of the things I was noticing from the book when I was reading it is that you were outlining that the IDF has these conflicting messages that it sends, of one for strength, one for security, one for sympathy. Let's just say those aren't maybe the exact words that you use, but let's kind of, for the sake of the argument, let's kind of focus on those and the contradictory that those may present each time. But one of the things I was thinking is when all of this was coming together, in some ways, Hamas and the Palestinians and the Arab world did kind of manage to achieve that because it was going out and saying, we will do this again, and stoking fear into Israelis or those in the region, while also getting an incredible amount of sympathy from audiences in the West based on some of the imagery and messaging that it was putting out there. So there was this kind of paradox I was noticing that the IDF and Israel wasn't quite achieving that spinning plate of kind of different messaging, where in some ways the kind of Palestinians and Hamas and the other side did achieve it. Is that a fair thing to identify?
It's an interesting point that I don't think I'd considered before. I think that for the most part, when Hamas was saying we're going to do October 7th again and again, I think that the world is so biased to favor Hamas that the international audience didn't really report on when Hamas said we're going to do October 7th again and again. The international audience was simply reporting on the photos of dead children that Hamas was putting out and the rubble and the consequences of what they were fighting Israel. And I think that I don't quite remember a time when the New York Times or CNN showed the footage of a Hamas spokesperson saying we're going to do October 7th again and again. I think that they really were able to stay inside their silos of saying one thing in Arabic and trying to threaten the Israeli world in that side of the world and then stay with the sympathetic messaging in the international audience. And I think it just goes to show the insane double standard that Israel has to deal with because Hamas isn't set to the same standards. And I think that the international media just is complicit in this double standard that Israel has to maintain.
Just my own anecdote to add to what you've just said. When there was the May 2021 flare-up between Israel and Hamas, kind of in a lifetime ago. I think you kind of mentioned it actually in your book that you were also operating around that time as well. But I noticed something about the front page of the New York Times when they were writing about it. I managed to trace back one of the photos of the children on the front cover. They'd used the same photo of the same kid like years before on a different cover, in a different story. And I was just one guy kind of sitting in my WeWork one day, and I was seeing how the media was using pictures of children in multiple different instances from different years and different contexts. Was the kid even from an area or not from an area? Like nothing was authorized. And so it was like very strange for me before all of this. And you, of course, you were identifying how you were in Telegram channels, you were tracking things, you were kind of the eyes everywhere. And you also, which I thought was quite cool, I haven't seen this before, but you left QR codes in the book where you could scan and present some of your media, right, from the IDF content or your own personal account, Rachel in Reserves. I want to talk now a bit about the challenges that you have in, like, as someone who operates in the media space. AI is among us; it's everywhere. And you outlined a part of the book in 2023. I think it was 23, maybe 24, where the IDF released the audio of a phone conversation. And the reason why it did it, maybe you can explain it better than me, but the reason why I did it was to basically validate or verify some of the uh, kind of criminal activity that was taking place. And can you talk me through about the response to that from the journalists? And then I want to lead into something else.
So I think it was a historic moment for the IDF when we released audio from a phone call from, a civilian in Gaza with a terrorist from Hamas, or two terrorists talking to each other. Or another example was the head of one of the hospitals with a Hamas member. And the reason that we put those out, as opposed to keeping them classified, was because the IDF realized that we were fighting a serious digital war when every piece of proof was necessary to show our side. Um, the response that we got from that was a lot of negativity, a lot of people saying that it was faked or AI or doctored. And my response to that is just, why would the IDF threaten its all of its credibility by doctoring audio? If that was the case, we would be found out so quickly. And you can't doctor audio or use AI audio and then not get caught. Like, that doesn't happen. So I just think that it's a crazy concept that we were under so much scrutiny for faking it, when shouldn't it be so obvious that the IDF would never, like, we can't afford to risk all of our credibility on something that's fake. Like, why would we ever do that? We need the world to believe us, and the world already barely believes us half the time as it is. Why would we ever fake anything? So I just really didn't understand why people were questioning us when, I mean, of course, I understood why. They didn't want to believe that it was real, so they wanted to just throw the fake accusation around, without thinking about it. But I just think that it's particularly short-sighted to accuse the IDF of publishing fake media when our entire reputation relies on our credibility.
Hmm. Yeah, I think, because when I got to that point of the book, I found it to be very current. Actually, even though it's now approaching 3 years since that moment, I think it's very of the time now. And there's even actually a new term for it. When I was kind of doing research for this call, it's the liar's dividend. So it's a legal scholars, Bobby Chesney and Danielle Citron, cited it, and they said it's when real evidence gets kind of disregarded, because the very concept of deep fakes, and because things can be faked, people often just say, it was AI generated, and they disregard actual evidence. And incidentally, that happened to Netanyahu this year. There was a video of him going around, and people thought it was AI generated, right, and actually it was real. And so you folks were kind of in the start of that. And also it's kind of, to build on what you were saying, it's the kind of, people don't want to believe that it's true, because if there's such a high support for Hamas or the Palestinian cause outside of this region in the West or in Europe, and as soon as something like that comes around, of course they kind of have to deny its validity. And it reminded me of the kind of believable women trend from a few years ago that was just completely thrown out the window when it came to Jewish victims on October 7, and that everyone was questioning whether the sexual assault that took place on that day even happened. And it's kind of the memory holding of such documented and tragic things. And so you're seeing it now, but also you are seeing it in the media space. So how is that going to change the role of being a digital warrior in going ahead? I mean, if we have something like this, that, people can just disregard things as AI, how do you go about, how does the mission change?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the mission changes in the sense that we always have to back up our claims with even more proof than we already have. I think that we can absolutely never use AI, because once we use it once, then everybody will always say that it was AI. There was a situation, I don't know, sometime in the last year, when the IDF showed that there was a Hezbollah operative who was performing as a journalist, and they created an image that was half this man in uniform and half this man in a pressed vest, and it was so clear that it was photoshopped because it was like a it was telling a story. It wasn't two real images, combined. Like that would it couldn't have been real. It was an illustration. But the IDF got a ton of backlash saying the IDF photoshops its images and creates fake evidence. And I was just like, come on, we weren't trying to convince you this was real. It was an illustration that was clearly photoshopped. But I learned from that people are so ready to attack the IDF for anything, and point the finger of blame for things that are so dumb that you can't imagine that people would even stoop so low. But I took from that okay, we just can never use Photoshop, can never use AI, because if we do, then the world is just going to attack us and like put and completely discount what the messages that we are actually trying to say.
And it's not even just using AI or Photoshop. I mean, I think you outlined as well an instance where you were just using kind of a graphic as a visual aid, right? It wasn't even that anything was trying to be anything other than it was like a sketch. Am I maybe making that up? Or I think there was an instance where I saw
I
that.
don't
Where
remember.
maybe it wasn't in your book, but I think it was like an example of kind of explaining strategy or warfare, but they were using a visual aid.
What there was the 3D renderings of under Shifa Hospital.
That was it, I think. Yeah.
So that was a big problem for us because we had intelligence indicating that there was a massive tunnel network under Shifa Hospital and Hamas headquarters, and the IDF came out with a 3D rendering of what it supposedly looked like under Shifa Hospital, and then we could never eventually back that up with real proof. So journalists got very angry about it, and they were constantly pressuring us every single day. Where's the proof? Where's the proof? And I think at the end of the day, it was sort of a mistake, or it was, an intelligence failure, that the IDF didn't have the correct picture of what was going on under Shifa. And I'll just say, for one, like from my perspective, I've always been very against releasing 3D animations because I don't think that, I think that for the Israeli audience, they do the job, but for the international audience, which is always questioning, always attacking us, I don't think that we do ourselves any good by setting the expectation so high. I think that we should have just waited and released whatever actual proof we had without setting the bar so high.
Do you think that 3 years later, or nearly 3 years later, there are different practices or codes or protocols within the IDF to fight some of these digital battles? Whether that's, connecting the three languages of the communications to kind of streamline it, or whether it's policies that may include 3D rendering or Photoshop. Like, talk me through how maybe the strategies within the IDF may have changed.
I'm not aware of how strategies might have changed because I haven't been in Miluim in over a year, and so I'm pretty removed from the internal workings. What I'll say that I've noticed is that in pretty much every photo or video of IDF soldiers that's come out, I've seen that their faces have been blurred, and I think that might be a response to, the International Court of Justice or the International Criminal Court making these kind of statements about IDF soldiers. And I think that maybe the IDF is worried about our soldiers' safety to a degree that they haven't been before. But that's just speculation. I don't know for sure. I think that the IDF is also a massive bureaucracy, and I think that it would take a lot longer than 3 years to change any formal procedure protocol. I don't think that there's really a solution to the three different narratives from the three different languages. So I don't think that that's something that's been updated. I think with every new commander that comes in, they try to put their own spin on things and their own touch on how the IDF social media team works. And I I think that the people who are in charge right now are doing a really good job. I personally have been very impressed with the content from the IDF for the last, year or so. Um, but I don't think that on an institutional level, I don't think much has changed. I could totally be wrong because I'm not there, but I just
Right.
think
I won't
knowing
hold you to it. Don't worry. Yeah. Yeah.
knowing how much of a bureaucracy it is, I think things are very slow to change.
Yeah, like anything, right? Like any big institution, these things take time. I noticed. We're kind of getting to it, so I kind of want to just ask you about it while we're here. Is that the you outline and very in your words, correctly identify when IDF soldiers don't act in accordance to what being kind of a good or responsible soldier would be in terms of their digital footprint or their kind of maybe their online etiquette. You outline some instances where people kind of do things they shouldn't have done, and it kind of capped your knees a bit when it came to telling the message and getting the stories out because soldiers who were maybe a bit younger or inexperienced were posting things they shouldn't have posted. I don't want to get into the details. Do you think there should be, I'm not really speaking IDF, I'm just speaking kind of from what you've seen in the context of how you were serving, do you think there should be some form of digital training as well as military or intelligence training? Like, where do you think
Yes.
the digital space fits into warfare or any of that?
So I think I mentioned this in the book. If I didn't mention it in the book, then I've been saying it in a lot of interviews. I think that what needs to happen is that before every combat operation, the soldiers get a briefing from intelligence saying this is what we expect to find, this is what we expect you to do, and there needs to be someone from the IDF spokesperson's unit at every single one of those briefings saying this is the possibility of what you might find, and you are not allowed to photograph it. You are not allowed to film it. You are representing the entire state of Israel, and you, an 18-year-old soldier, could have a positive effect on how the world sees the Israel or a detrimental effect on how the world sees Israel. And just as much as you're responsible for protecting people on the ground, you're responsible for protecting Israel's image. And I think that if soldiers hear it enough times, if their phones are taken away before they go into combat situations, I think that we could really make some progress on giving the world less ammo on, hating Israeli soldiers.
Mm. It's kind of crazy to think actually they can take their mobiles in or phones. I haven't really thought about it, but that would seem like an obvious one. Just kind of leave it there. You
Many
can
can't.
communicate through.
Many commanders are good about preventing them from bringing their phones in, but there's plenty of cases where they slip through the cracks and bring them in
Right.
anyway. And a lot of it is because they're dealing with reservists, and a lot of 21-year-old commanders don't feel like they can tell a 39-year-old reservist what to do and what not to do, and that it's not that big of a deal. And but it is a big deal.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation as well. As just like kind of the setup of the IDF and how those lines can be blurred but also stay the same. I do want to touch on one last bit before I turn it on to you as a final point. I do want to kind of address meme warfare, which I guess is kind of in line with kind of young people and their phones and social media. You outlined two moments specifically that went viral, more so than just kind of what was happening on October 7. There were two moments. One was the AI generated image of all eyes on Rafah during the time when the IDF was about to go into the Rafah. It was the tent image. I think everyone has it in their minds. And the Blockout 2024, which was when there was a campaign, urging mass blocking of celebrities who were staying silent on Gaza, just for the context of those who may not be familiar with what I'm referring to. You outlined very clearly how All Eyes on Rafah was a massive success, but then the Israeli IDF equivalent, All Eyes on the Hostages, didn't maybe make a splash. Why do you think some viral messages or memes or whatever are successful and some aren't? Is it a numbers game or a tech
I
game?
think it is a numbers game. I think that the fact that there are 135 Muslims for every one Jew in the world means that we are at a severe disadvantage And that's not even counting the number of well-meaning Westerners who are not Muslim, but they hear about Gaza on the news and their hearts go out to the oppressed people. And I think that social media has a bias, toward the people who are oppressed versus the people who are the aggressor. And as much as it's crazy for us two Israelis to be talking about this, the side of the hostages is the side of the aggressor. And even though there were 251 completely innocent, completely oppressed, completely tortured people that were in Gaza at no fault of their own, they still represent the side of the military power that is the IDF. And so it was very difficult to get the attention on them. And also because all eyes on the hostages forces the world to take a second look at the narrative that they've been sharing and spreading. And it's very, it's this cognitive dissonance of, wait, Israel's the oppressor, but they have hostages that are being held in captivity by the oppressed people of Gaza. That doesn't make sense. So we're just going to ignore it. Versus the people of Gaza, they were trapped in Rafah and didn't have anywhere to go. I think that was a very black and white narrative where the military, going into Rafah would have been like the last straw in displacing all of the innocent civilians of Gaza. And that's a very easy narrative to protest. I think it all comes back to basically just what's simple and what's not. I think that, I actually, one of the things I wrote in my book about why Israel's PR is so bad is because we don't have any good chance, which is basically the funny way of saying that our narrative is complex and nuanced and multi-layered, and the narrative
You said Israel doesn't have a rhyme or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that just goes to show that when we have all eyes on Rafah versus all eyes on the hostages, one is simple and one is nuanced and layered, and the world doesn't have the patience for the nuanced and layered one, so they just ignore it, and that's the way the world works.
How do you think social media has rewired some of the ways that societies judge this morality? Because you're right, it's like, not to give such a big question, so I don't want to burden you with like what could probably be an academic essay, because that's like I didn't mean to just willy-nilly give such a big question, but so much of the battleground that you outline in the book takes place online, and X is probably you talk about X in the kind of, or Twitter in the work aspect, and then Instagram on the personal aspect. How much do you think that output does shape things? And if a conflict like this were to take place in 1995 or 1985 or whatever, how would that change?
It's a great question. I could talk about that for a long time. I think the biggest thing that we have, okay, Twitter is known as, the town square for regular people, but it's the place where journalists live and get their news and decide what they're going to report on. And when the IDF posts something on Twitter, our main goal is to attract the attention of international journalists. Instagram, I think, is the platform for more regular people who aren't as involved. It's the people who want to see cute reels and photos of dogs and things like that in between getting their news. I think that if this conflict had taken place in, 1965 or whatever it would be, that the world would be a lot more pro-Israel. I think, I read something or I heard something recently that I can't attribute. I don't remember where I heard it from, but that the age of social media, documenting every single event or building crumbling or person killed is so detrimental to the reputation of Israel compared to the, legends of, let's say, Entebbe, which happened 50 years ago, and there were no photos and there were no images, there were no photos and there were no videos coming out in real time. And then the Operation Rescue, the rescue operation that took place to get the hostages out of the Entebbe airport was turned into this stuff of legends. Like, you didn't know what it looked like. You didn't hear people on the ground talk about it. It became just a legend, and people revered and respected Israel. And, that when you have proof and you have when you have photos and videos documenting every single thing on the ground, and as well as the editorializing and the Palestinians crying and all of that stuff, the nature of the big, bold Israel that is defending itself, it doesn't measure up. And I would say that if this conflict had taken place 50 years ago, I think there would be a lot more support for Israel, because Hamas and the Palestinians are experts in manipulating world emotion and faking things as well. You talked about seeing those images in the New York Times. I was researching for my book, and I found tons of photos of emaciated children that were from Yemen and Sudan. They weren't even from Gaza. And I think that having everyone have access to social media in real time is only detrimental to Israel. And yeah, it would be a very different story if this was taking place 50 years ago.
No, no doubt, and that kind of contributes to everything, all of the challenges that are taking place in many ways because of the changing landscape, as you've mentioned, the pace of change that needs to happen. Not this is interesting because it's like in a military and digital context, but there's also other institutions that need to quickly change pace because of technology or news or anything. So it's kind of the problems stay the same, right? Even though the contexts are often different. I want to begin the close now by kind of turning to you a bit. You were very candid in the end of your book, and in the last bit, you were very open about the effects that the work you were doing kind of had on you. You mentioned that your mental health is still in a precarious place. I hope you don't mind me repeating that. But
It's okay.
you write about it very openly in the book, and you share the impact that kind of reviewing the content, building the videos, seeing them go out there, and then seeing the response, whether it was good or bad, come back to you. How has it changed you? How has it changed the way that you think about the media? How has it changed the way that you think about maybe people? Just what have you come out of this basically feeling?
So yeah, as you said, I was very open at the end of my book about the mental health challenges that I faced after watching hours and hours and hours of footage from the October 7th massacre. And I think that, it's just kind of changed me in the way that I have nightmares. I've been having nightmares since, a couple weeks after October 7th. I have a lot less tolerance for graphic images. But I think that there's also a part of me that is very much a soldier and wants to continue moving forward, and, tries to put the traumatic experiences in the back burner. And yeah, you know, I think everyone in Israel is suffering from some kind of PTSD in one way or another that that we may not want to admit, but the whole country is really, it's having a hard time recovering from the biggest attack in our history. And yeah, I don't really have a good cookie cutter answer for you on that, but it's tough, and I just hope that I've been very fortunate to, after a long time, get after a long time of searching and fighting, to get the help that I need, and I just really hope that everyone in Israel is able to get the help that they need.
Definitely. Thank you. The let's take it more abstract now as we kind of get to the close. If you were designing, you outline at the end of the book, you outline some of the challenge. I mean, throughout the book as well, but mainly at the end, you outline some kind of maybe some of the ways that things need, ways that need to kind of change or evolve to fight some of these battles online. If you were designing the spokesperson's unit from scratch, or any kind of unit that you operate, if you were designing it from scratch, what would you have done differently? How would you frame it differently, either through structure or tone or process? Talk me through maybe some of the ways that your dream spokesperson unit would run.
That's a great question. If I were able to design the spokesperson's unit from scratch, I would have first and foremost nixed the command to stop showing graphic footage from October 7th. in the weeks following the massacre, because I think that um, the only way to make, as I said before, the only way to make our point about why we're fighting is to show what we are up against and what happened to us that necessitates this war happening. Um, I would I would fight emotion with emotion. I would, post videos of soldiers. I would ask, hostage family members to talk on camera, and I would give them the opportunity to, cry and not edit it out, because Palestinians are crying on the news and that's how they're getting their like emotional support. I think that I would like to even see soldiers, get more emotional and showcase the real toll that the war is taking on them, not hiding from it. I would absolutely ban phones from going into Gaza and Lebanon, and I would really go like unit by unit, team by team, and really give over lessons about what social media etiquette is expected of them. Um, and I think the most important thing is that I would highlight, more diverse voices. I would love to see interviews with more Muslim, Arab, Black soldiers who are to represent Israel in a more diverse way, because the army is, the most diverse body of people in the country, and it's a shame that there's only a handful of people that really speak for Israel, and that they're all white. Um, and yeah, I think that covers everything. I think that as soon as the IDF learns to fight emotion with more emotion and not just facts and logic, that we'll be in a much better place.
Mm. Well, if you ever did run a spokesperson's unit, it sounds like you would have your first kind of couple of months ahead of you, quite busy and planned with some of the exciting things that you would do. You mentioned a lot of the time in the book, when you mentioned about going back and being called back for your help, how that filled you with national pride and excitement. When the dust settles, do you see a future where Rachel goes in and does that full time, or is that a different part of your journey?
So
What's the future?
I served for 4 years in the spokesperson's unit. I was a soldier for 2 years, and then they created a position for me to stay as a civilian employee, and I served for another 2 years in that capacity. So I've already done, a large part of my time in Israel in the army, and part of me feels like I would love to go back, and then part of me feels like the bureaucracy is just too much, and the stress of being on call 24/7 is just too much for someone who's not, young anymore. Um, but I definitely intend to be an active reservist for the rest of my life in Israel, and I hope that they call me in for the next conflicts, and I won't stop volunteering to go in and messaging the commanders and saying, call me in, call me in. I won't stop doing that. So I would love to be involved for the rest of my life, honestly.
Amazing, amazing, Rachel. Well, I hope there aren't too many instances where such an emergency takes place where people have to be called in to do some of the things that you were doing. But I think I speak for a lot of people where I say thank you for all the work you were doing and for the messages and the content that you were putting out, especially in those early days. I do want to end now, as I often do, which is with a quickfire round. I want to give you the opportunity to I want to shoot some questions at you, and I want you to respond as quick as possible. And we'll get like one last kind of squeeze of that juice from the insights of yours. What's one platform that everyone misunderstands?
I think TikTok. I think people don't really understand people who are older than, let's say, 25 don't really understand how TikTok it works and what people want to see on it, and they just take the same content that they make for Instagram and Facebook and they throw it on TikTok, and then they don't understand why they don't have thousands of views on TikTok. But I personally don't understand the TikTok algorithm myself, so I don't have any words of advice.
That's because you're also over 25. I can completely agree with what you just said. I don't understand TikTok at all. What's the best communicator you've ever worked with?
Jonathan Ghosts.
What's the worst piece of communications advice you ever received?
to stop showing the graphic footage of the massacre after October 7th.
What's one AI tool every communicator should learn?
Oh, I'm so AI. What's the word? I'm so terrified of AI, and I'm so not so good at using AI. I'm gonna have to pass.
Okay. What tool do you use mainly, if
I
you
use
like to?
11 Labs to do voiceovers, and I use Gemini to write scripts for when I have it's like sometimes when I read an article in the Times of Israel or in something like that, and I just copy and paste the article and I say, turn this into a 45 to 60-second script for a pro-Israel influencer, that I find to be really useful. Although I have to say, I end up having to make a lot of my own manual edits, but it's a good starting point.
Important with all AI, by the way, to have
Yeah,
a human overview at the very end. In 10 years, who's going to shape wars more, soldiers or storytellers?
storytellers.
Last question for you, Rachel, and then I'll let you go. What is the best way for people to follow you, keep up to date with you, track all the things that you're up to?
My Instagram is Rachel in Reserves, and I am posting almost daily there, so people can follow me and keep up with my work there.
I will be sure to put a link on the screen and in the description so people can easily follow that thread to follow you there. Rachel, thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed your book. I hope it has a huge success. I hope loads of people read it just to get an understanding of Israel in those early days, the effects that it had on soldiers like you. And thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for interviewing me. It was such a pleasure to be here.